I was reading your latest book, wonderfully titled Death, the End of Self-Improvement. What I thought I'd ask you first is, if death is so powerful, it's such a powerful dharma, death is this wonderful guru. There's so much for us to learn from death and through the dissolution process of dying. Why are we so scared of it? Why are we ignoring it? And why are we doing our best to avoid it?
Good question. Um, and of course, any answer we come up with is sort of made up, but yeah, I mean, I think when we identify as this little separate individual and don't realize the wholeness of everything, so that we feel like we're just this little cut off, separate uh, being apart from everything, well, then death is the end of me, the end of everything. So, and our probably our most basic instinct is to survive as this little me, as this body mind organism, as um, so that's scary to us. And it's the unknown. I mean, none of us really know what happens after death. Um, so it's going into the unknown. I've noticed that sometimes at night when I'm still up reading or watching a movie or something, and then it's time to go to bed and I'm actually tired, but I somehow put it off. And I really tuned into that, and it's like it's kind of similar to death. It's like we're going from the room that's lighted up and where we know where everything is into the dark, and we're going from conscious waking life where our movie is pretty predictable and familiar into the world of dreams where we don't know what's going to happen and we have no control, and then into deep sleep. And so there's this, and when we were children, it was like when we went to bed, we had to have mommy or daddy there, to while we fell asleep. So yeah, I think it's a similar kind of thing. Like it's a fear of the unknown. It's a fear of not being anymore. It's and our culture is all about being young and beautiful, and old people get sort of, I think, beautiful, but in a very different way. And then you die, and it's sort of scary to people, I think, just the whole thing of disease and old age and disability and death and all of that. So yeah, I don't know.
And that in Buddhism, that was what the Buddha saw, wasn't it? Old age,
Yeah.
sickness, death, and that's when he realized there's got to be more than me just living it up in the palace.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
I was thinking when you say we don't really know what happens, of course, at death. So we have the Tibetan Book of the Dead, and reading that is just so fascinating. There's all the bardos and the stages, and people practicing for the bardos and people practicing for these stages and what to do at the moment of death, and this wonderful cultural heritage of how to die. But you get to the last page, and of course the thought pops up. But what if none of that is true? You know, then what?
Yeah, I mean, and I've often heard, I mean, I'm not, I have spent some time with one Tibetan Buddhist teacher, but basically Tibetan Buddhism is something I haven't been that steeped in. So I've been mostly in Zen when I've been in Buddhism. So I don't even think, I might have read the Tibetan Book of the Dead years ago, but I can't even remember. But I've heard it said that the bardos can also be seen as just teachings about this living reality here and now. Because in a way, we're dying moment to moment. I mean, every instant is disappearing the minute it arrives, really. So we're in a constant process, really, of dying and being born and dying and reincarnating.
Mm.
As in a way, reincarnation to me just kind of means the way we reincarnate as this character in the movie of waking life, the way we kind of reincarnate our story and our identities and all of that sort of thing from one day to the next and one moment to the next.
Death becomes something else then, doesn't it? It becomes more pervasive and sort of merges with life. They're sort of the same thing, a coin with two sides, rather than me as this limited person who at some point will die. I mean, yeah, that's terrifying, isn't it? But when
Yeah,
but when you understand there isn't an actual separate self in here that has a life, and as you say, it's a momentary flow of consciousness or experience, and there's a whole different sense to death.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, because it is one whole birth and death. Um, and it can be understood in different ways as sort of the one consciousness that never dies, or as Buddhism often sees it as the sort of interdependence and emptiness and impermanence of everything, in which everything is, as in the Indra's net, the net of jewels, each of which is only a reflection of all the others and all that. So it's like, and you look at nature, and something dies and it's becomes food for the soil and for other plants, or other animals eat it and so on. So the body in nature doesn't really, I mean, it kind of disintegrates back into everything. And of course we're dying, we're not the little babies that we once were, or the 3-year-old toddlers that we once were, or the teenagers that we once were. And in my case, I'm no longer the young adult that you still are.
Well,
And
I'm not that young, but yeah.
well, you're definitely younger than me. Let's put it that way. So it's like I mean, really, like 60 is young to me now. So we have died many times just in the course of a day or a minute or a lifetime.
And on a cellular level, even,
Yeah.
it's not even that this body is aging. What we call this body is made up of other living things, and they're living and dying probably more rapidly than, at a faster pace than anything else.
Yeah, and also, we're completely interdependent with the environment around us, with everything we think is not me, you know. So we couldn't live without air and water and food, and things are going in and out all the time. And so, and if we tune into the body just experientially, meditatively, with our eyes closed and just feeling the body, um, it's no longer, it's clear it's not a solid thing. It's just vibrations and sensations, and you can't really find an actual place where inside turns into outside. And if you're listening to like a sound, like a bird cheep or the sound of traffic or something, where is it? Is it inside me or outside me? If it's thought that says it's outside me and it's coming in and all that, but in just tuning into the actual experience, there's no inside. There's just cheep, 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 or woof, 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 or whatever it is. And with no separation, no gap. And yes, I think when you really see this, and feel this, it takes away the fear of death. And I've gone under anesthesia a number of times too, and it's been really fascinating because I can always feel conscious experiencing slipping away. Some people say they don't have that, but I can feel it happening. And every time I say out loud, "Here I go," and and it's like it's like whatever I most deeply am receding, or into something that's deeper than, or subtler than, or other than the movie of waking life, conscious experiencing. And wherever it is that I, in the deepest sense, go, when I come out of it, there's no memories or anything. I don't. So I'm assume there's no experience, although I can't be sure. It might just be no memories. But and deep sleep is a wonderfully rejuvenating, restful something we look forward to. So I think death is probably, and at a certain point when you're old and body is in pain and you're you can't get around anymore, death is something that you're ready for and you kind of welcome.
It's what Nisargadatta Maharaj says, for the jhani, death is a welcome event.
Yeah, yeah.
Oh, it also reminds me of, well, first of all, cessation, in deep meditation, moving through the different jhanas.
Which,
And
by the way, I know nothing about because I've
no,
never. So,
I'm the same. I'm the same. But I can appreciate, meditation masters who can go up through the jhanas or maybe go down through the jhanas, dissolving consciousness until they, well, experience is the wrong word, but cessation happens. They always say that it's like a lights out nothing. There's no knowing anymore. It's just out. I'm guessing it's like anesthesia, just gone. Then the lights blink back on again.
I've never had that experience, and I recently saw something on YouTube on a channel that I tune into sometimes. It was about these, I think, Tibetan monks who could um, who could go into that state like at will, and they were experimenting with them. Neuroscientists were experimenting with them. I mean, I can't, I certainly have no experience of anything like that,
Mm.
other than anesthesia or going into deep sleep at night. But um, I've never
Well,
had an experience in meditation that felt like, sort of every like anesthesia, like that kind of lights out.
this is what makes death so fascinating. It sounds terrifying, but once you explore it, and there's people that are essentially having these lights out experiences. We go to sleep every night, we disappear, anesthesia, we disappear. Then it becomes a direct mystery that we are involved in. Like, what are we? Where do we go? Who is the we that goes? Why do we come back? What reboots when the anesthesia um, wears off. And sometimes waking up as well in the morning, you have those moments where you're not, the mind isn't fully running yet, and there's those moments where you're still kind of in this, I guess, no self moments. The me
Oh
hasn't
yeah.
revved up yet.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes you wake up in the morning or from a nap or something and you just like there's a period of, I don't know, 10, 15, 20 seconds where you don't know who you are or where you
Yeah,
are or what's going on. And then it's sort of, you can feel it coming back to you. And you can feel, your life situation coming back to you, sort of like, oh my God, yes, my partner just died a week ago. And, all those kinds
yeah.
of things. They sort of reemerge. But yeah, and that reminds me, I think part of the fear of death also has to do with people have these beliefs about heaven and hell and stuff like that. Or reincarnation, if you believe in sort of literal reincarnation, that you might come back as a cockroach or something, or that you might have to, be reborn as somebody going through horrible abuse or torture or something. That's very scary to think about. So I think that's probably a part of the fear.
And just going back to what you said before about the culture we live in, and you and I live in a similar sort of postmodern first world culture. We don't live as Amazonian tribes people. Um, so obviously there are different cultures, but you're right. Our culture is youth orientated, isn't it? The
Oh,
teenager
yeah.
the teenager popped into existence in the 50s, I think, didn't they? Late 40s. Um, and they're the ones that get the voice. Media is based on young people, and I often think, like with Plato, he didn't let anyone into the academy who was under 40 because they haven't really had the life experience to develop some either disinterest with previous things and with that a little bit of wisdom. So I do sometimes think that the youth culture is great, but there's maybe not too much wisdom there yet because they're still in the thrill of the experience. And so if they've got the microphone, then maybe we're not getting the bigger picture, the deeper picture. There's no elders anymore. There's no wise men, wise women who can maybe share these perspectives about death.
I think we definitely have sort of a youth culture, which, and of course, there's a place for, young people have an energy and a freshness, and they think, they don't really appreciate the history of, even if they've studied history of, they sort of think they see everything like it's all just right here, right happening now. So they have a wonderful, they have something very vital to contribute. I mean, young people have been behind so many of the
Mm.
social changes and things that have happened. And then old people have something to continue, because when you get older, as I am now, you have this vast sort of perspective of history that you've lived through, and all the cycles that have gone on, and the different things that the wars, everything that's happened. And it gives you a perspective that's very different than how you saw the world when you were 21 or 22, you know. And so I think that we need to hear from all different ages, because everybody has something different to contribute, a different perspective.
Yeah. And of course, you can get very young people who are very wise and very old people who are very stupid.
Oh yeah, I mean, I'm actually deeply impressed with I some of the young people that I've lived with in the past. Uh, I lived with a teenage boy at one point who was, I see, he was way more mature than I was even then in my middle age or something. He was he was incredible, and because each generation sort of soaks in and imbibes what the elders had to work and struggle for. So um, he just had a kind of consciousness that for those of us in the generation before him, we had to kind of find that and develop it and struggle for it and everything. He just kind of had it, just kind of was in his DNA or something. And so yeah, I'm very impressed with how, and I talk to young people. I mean, I see young people who get this, oh, sort of awake perspective of wholeness and non-duality and all of that very deeply, really early in life, like, they're like 21 or something, or 22, or even a teenager or something. And well, I think, didn't you grow up, was your father was a Buddhist teacher, and you were sort of steeped in this, as I recall, from a
Mm.
young age, weren't you?
Yeah, that's true. That's true. Yeah, that was the atmosphere around me as I grew up. And then talking of growing up, then where does it begin for you, Joan? As a young girl, what were you interested in, and what led you in the direction of sort of self-exploration and spirituality?
Well, again, anything I say is sort of a story, but it's like my parents, although they didn't belong to any religion, I would describe them as deeply spiritual, or deeply, um, they had a lot of insight and wisdom. And my father was interested in quantum books by Einstein and things like that, physics, and he was a determinist, and told me that, when I was very young, that everything could only be exactly the way it was, and that the sun will explode at some moment, and things like that. And the table, we are essentially the same as the table, and so I was hearing a lot of stuff from him that was pretty far out, that kind of made sense to me right away. Whereas my mother was like, I don't know what he's talking about. And but she was like just sort of emanating love and compassion and love of life. And so there was another dimension coming from her. And then I was always very drawn to spirituality as a child. I started reading books about religion. I felt very drawn to Buddhism, but never thought I'd meet any Buddhists, because, back then there wasn't like a Zen center in every town. And then I got into Christianity for a little while, and then in college I read Alan Watts, and took a class on Vedanta and Zen, and began sitting with a little Zen group occasionally. And so, and then by the time I was a young adult, I was in the Bay Area by that time, in San Francisco, and Suzuki Roshi had started the San Francisco Zen Center, and where, after my little escapade into being drunk and stoned all the time, I I ended up connecting with the San Francisco Zen Center and on from there. So it was something I was drawn to, I think, very young, although I wasn't in an atmosphere like the one you were in, where it was sort of all around me. But in a way, it was because my father saying the kinds of things he said to me, and the energy from my mother and everything. I think it was in the books I was reading on world religions and things like that. It was, and I actually spent my nap time sometimes. I had a quiet time every day when I didn't have to be napping, but I had to sit in my room alone, be in my room alone. And often what I was doing was inventing religions.
Okay, let's hear
I
some
would
of these
write up
religions.
little scriptures, and I had heard that the Torah was kept in a bag or something, so I was making little bags and inventing rituals, and you know
That's probably how religions start anyway.
yeah, yeah. Someone once said religions are started by someone with OCD, says you have to walk this way and to bow this way three times.
Yes, I
I
understand. Yeah, yeah.
think it was just in me for who knows what reasons from really early on.
Put it in your back pocket, I don't care. Put it in your mouth and chew. Cause when you're dead, I'll be right there dead with you. I fall short and get taken away by the pattern in the carpet and the light display. Roast potato and gravy. And I'm reborn from saccharine.
I mean, I really like the determinist perspective because it is aligned with physics and the universe and the fact that this conversation could only have happened and it's a direct result of the Big Bang or whatever did, as you say, it's all a story, isn't it? But um, and I remember Ramesh Balsekar, that was one of his main teachings really was that, what happens is what was meant to happen. And if you're going to wake up, you're going to wake up. And if you're not, you're not, but that's still it because there's only it happening. Um, so that was quite freeing. It kind of, I always thought it was quite sort of intellectually, it sounds quite confining, the idea that there's only what's going to happen and you can't deviate. But when I heard Ramesh teach this, I found it rather freeing because you could let go because whatever was going to happen was going to happen.
Yeah, it's very freeing because it frees you from guilt and blame, and it's just kind of relaxing if you feel like you have to make some big medical decision or something, and then you just kind of realize you're just waiting to see what decision you make. You're just waiting to see what decision happens. It's not like you have to do this and get it right, or you could ruin everything. So it takes all that away. And and at the same time, I don't know if I would quite describe myself now as a determinist in the sense, because of course, all of these things are conceptual models, which I think is really important to remember. But they're experientially, it feels to me like when there is awareness, I mean, in one sense, there's always awareness. That's all, but in the sense of when there's when we're present in the sense of being not lost in thought, but present here and now, and there's awareness in that kind of way, it feels like that's where something new can really enter the picture somehow, or conditioning can fall apart. And of course, why does that happen at that moment? And you can fit it into the deterministic perspective, of course,
Yeah.
but experientially, it feels like there's a kind of shift that's possible that I can't bring about by willpower or thought. It's not the little me doing it. Which is just the thinking mind. It's it's something else. You know what I mean?
Yeah. To me, I mean, to me, it sounds like you're describing meditation, meaning that it gets you out of the way. You drop into that state where there's just presence or awareness, and it's spacious and quiet, and that's often when people often say, "Oh, it's a state where you don't think," and but that's also the state where some of the best thoughts, arise that you could never have thought. And talking about people making up religions, but For instance, Muhammad was meditating in a cave when the angel Gabriel commanded him to recite the Quran, which he didn't come up with that. It's beyond him. So, yeah, you sort of get out of the way, and an intelligence, a potentiality, something bigger that has bigger pictures can often bubble up.
Yeah, it feels like you step out of the conditioned mind of sort of habitual thinking and habitual identity as all the things that the little me, and then all of the categories the little me identifies with. And you step out of that your whole picture of what the world is and what's going on. You step out of that whole thing, and there's just something very open and spacious and boundless and free. Experientially, it's like my first all day sitting at the Zen Center. I've often talked about this, but that's where I noticed for the first time that every thought I was having was about the future. And from that moment on, that it was as if a light had been turned on. And from then on, I could see that as it was happening. And then eventually that pattern, that obsessive pattern of thinking about the future, gradually unwound and disappeared. Um, Not in some big flash, but just through that kind of. And another thing is I have a compulsive finger biting compulsion that still flares up. And when I'm completely present with it, not trying to stop, not judging it, just completely present with it, feeling it, like being with it, not no separation, just completely with it, it falls away. It can come back 3 seconds later, but in that complete presence, it just ends. And um, I can think of, there's been many examples in my life that are sort of like that, where where those it's like the light of awareness illuminates something, and then it's like awareness is what really transforms things, as opposed to willpower, like, trying to, I'm never going to bite my fingers again, just doesn't work. And believe me, I've tried it like 6 million times. Um, and of course, how awareness comes, that kind of awareness, how that develops or comes into being, or how we access that and all of that is, you could again use the deterministic model for that, because who can say? It's not like we produce that by will or something. Um, it seems like the more we touch into that, the more available it becomes.
And I guess as your title, death, the end of self-improvement, awareness, or being awareness, resting as awareness, it's the end of self-improvement. As you say, we're not using that kind of forced willpower to try and change ourselves, not die, stay healthy, change that person.
Yeah, and it doesn't, of course, doesn't mean that, I mean, I still go to the fitness center and to try to keep my body in shape as much as I can, and try to eat food that I believe is healthy. I don't want to have a stroke if I can avoid it, and that kind of thing. Um, and there's still an interest in transformation, in the sense that there's an interest in, um, well, it'd be lovely not to bite my fingers compulsively, or, not to lose my temper in ways that feel um, out of control and hurtful sometimes. Um, and so what's disappeared is the sort of like self-improvement project where I feel like I have to change those things in order to be okay. Um, and or I'm really like trying to do that. Um, that doesn't seem to be here anymore, but there's still a kind of interest or aspiration, I don't know what word to use, to kind of continue to go deeper, to continue to open, to see things, for things to fall away. And at the same time, there's an okayness with, like, if I'm biting my fingers to the end of my life, and even if I'm doing it on my deathbed, that's okay. Because I've also, you also sort of get to a point where you see that awareness, that everything is this one whole aware, presence, whatever you want to call it. And so even these things that we consider negative um, are also this in some way, and they're inseparable from the things that we consider positive, and they go together in some way. So there's no longer a kind of judgment of it or a pathologizing of it in the same way, or trying to fix it.
The war finishes.
The war, yeah, is
Yeah,
over.
the war is over. And that's freedom, isn't it? I mean, it's not that, as you say, I mean, I used to, imagine what being awakened would be like, and, how would I function, or how would this body function without a self? Would I just sit for hours and slowly, waste away because I can't get up and get some food because there's no self in here, there's no preference. And of course, until that happens, the mind really has no idea about what a non-event it is. That it's no, there's a personality and it still does what the personality does, but there's just an understanding that it's like smoke. It's just ephemera. None of it's solid or stuck or fixed, or you're no longer fettered by any of that because it's just smoke. It's just this kind of
Yeah,
dance of is.
yeah. I think the whole no self thing gets really confusing for people because there's still a personality. There's still a person called Joan or Mike. Um, there's still a body. Um, I mean, in the sort of, you can go to the place also where you see that there is no body, there is no Joan, there is no Mike, because you can't really pin these things down or find them or figure out where the boundaries are between them and anything else, or they're just smoke-like, dream-like appearances in consciousness of consciousness. Um, but in everyday life, sort of practically speaking, there's still Joan and Mike and the body and all of that, and there are still preferences. It's the attachment to preferences that's really the problem, not having preferences, and there's still a sense of boundaries, of healthy boundaries, psychological boundaries and things. you know, it's not okay to walk down the street for people to come up and grope me or something, like, you know what I mean? It's like there's there's limits and boundaries and all of that, and so it's not like all of that, like all of the things we call the self just vanish or something. Um, but in any moment of just being here, and I'm sure everyone has moments like this that they're just maybe not noticing, but in any moment of just simply being here, um, and maybe doing something like washing the dishes or driving the car, or maybe just sitting, looking out the window, or sitting on a park bench or whatever, and you're just being here. There's no self in the sense that there's no thought, because the self is really just a bunch of thoughts and stories and memories and sensations, and all of that kind of comes together to this create this kind of mirage. And in many moments of our life, it isn't there. There's just cheep, 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 and woof, 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 and the breathing happening and the clouds in the sky and all of that. And then maybe a thought pops up like, oh, why did I say that yesterday? That was so stupid. And then immediately there seems to be me who did something stupid and who shouldn't have done that. And it's as if you can just kind of feel this spacious, boundless being just kind of contracting down into this little encapsulated, tight feeling of being me, this separate little me who's not okay and has screwed up again, or whatever. And I don't know that that ever completely goes away. Maybe for some people that just never happens anymore. I can't say that it never happens here anymore, but you begin to see it for what it is when it happens, and so it doesn't have much grip anymore. You don't tend to spin off into those stories. There still might be a thought of, oh God, why did I say that? But it doesn't, you don't go from there to, oh, what a horrible person I am. I ruined my life, and which you might have done 20 years before or something. So And there's no you doing any of it. Of course, that's the other discovery, that every, we're not making our thoughts happen. They just happen. And so do our actions and our choices and everything, and you can really see that if you just explore, which watch as it's happening, and you begin to see that you don't need a me there. You don't need a sense of being me to cook dinner or anything else.
And when you say it like that, and when you ask someone to find the me, we can find thoughts and we can find feelings and we can find a body, but we can't find the me that those thoughts and feelings refer to.
Yeah.
I always say it's like going into McDonald's and asking to see Mr. McDonald. Like, where is he? Show me. And you're searching frantically. Where I need to see him. It's a brand name. There's no Mr. McDonald in there. But of course, the restaurant runs perfectly efficiently without there needing to be a Mr. McDonald. For most of us, we do seem to be hypnotized by this natural selfing. I think it's just like nature. It's there for a purpose. It's to protect you. It's a survival mechanism. But I don't know how many people sort of consciously see that it's just a construct and they're not fundamentally it. But once you start pointing out that, well, it disappears in deep sleep, and there's moments when you're looking out the window and you're not selfing, and suddenly it's more intermittent. This me is inconsistent. It goes
Yeah.
from being something that's consistent because we've never examined it to, oh yeah, do you know what? There's huge periods of time throughout the day where you're right, I'm not thinking about a me or self-referencing. I'm just driving the car, chopping the onions.
Yeah, and I think it's never actually continuous. It's just thought that makes it seem that way, because it is intermittent, and as we just can discover. And I think the thing is, some people have these very dramatic awakenings. Um, can't remember what happened in your life, but I do like people like Eckhart Tolle, who has
Mm,
seemed to have a dramatic shift that out of the blue that was seems to be more or less permanent, and
mm.
not I don't I'm not under the illusion that he never gets angry or never has any um, but I
Yeah,
mean, something clearly very dramatic and large happened there that seemed to be pretty sustained. And that, I think that's relatively rare. I think for most of us, it's a much more gradual, maybe with intermittent light bulb moments, but it tends to be a much more gradual um, process. And unfortunately, I think a lot of people are looking, as I was for a while, for this great breakthrough
mm,
that you've heard described, as like some line in the sand that you're going to cross, and then I will be awake, which eventually I noticed, well, wait a minute, who is this me that's going to be awake?
yeah, this is it.
And hey, this is all about the future. And it's another
Yes.
thought about me getting somewhere in the future. And, even the notion that it's me who is hypnotized by thought is kind of like consciousness, you could say, is hypnotized by its own ability to play these roles and everything. And or I'm sure we can explain it neurologically and through neuroscience in it as well, but it's really no me who's getting hypnotized either. That's part of the hypnotic trance.
And again, it's a common thing often in spiritual circles where people sort of come to a conclusion that and I was there too at one point, I've got it. Suddenly you work it out. Your mind works it out. All I need to do is get rid of me. And that's just this loop that goes round and round, and there's no resolution with that loop. I mean, that's just a feedback loop of selfing. I need to get rid of me. Well, which there is no me. How does me get rid of me? It's the me wanting to get rid of the me, which is where I found meditation, just the practice of stilling, tranquilizing, calming the mental activity to be, that's kind of my main practice. And it's what I teach, other people. And enormously helpful, especially if it can be pointed out that when you notice that state of no mind, there is no self happening. You're in that moment where it's a selfless moment. which is really what the recognition is. It's not in a Buddhist monastery somewhere. It's that moment you realize, just this, just
It's just
this.
right here, right now, always, right? It's always now. I mean,
Yeah,
it sounds like such a cliche now, but it's such a profound realization, actually, that there's always only now. It's such a profound thing to really grok.
yeah,
And of course, the other thing is that awareness has no problem with any of it. Awareness just allows everything and holds on to nothing. And so it's like even the hypnotic trance and the me story and all of the compulsions and everything else, awareness has no problem with any of it, really. Awareness is just kind of beholding it all. And not that there's a separation between awareness and what appears, but um, it's more like just different sort of aspects or dimensions of this whole happening.
when people say, "Oh, this kind of infinite consciousness," I mean, maybe that's one way to understand that word or what it's pointing to. A bit like you said with Indra's net, this just an infinity of forms and perspectives and levels of consciousness and trees and
Yeah.
plants and universes. I mean, it's just your mind can't really grasp that.
Yeah, and it's like you said, it's the me that wants to get rid of the me. You
Mm.
know, the me is just a momentary wisp of smoke passing in this giant dream-like whatever it is. Yet when we get on a spiritual path, it can start to seem like the me is the great enemy that we have to vanquish or something. Um, and it's just really nothing. There's nothing there. It's not even real.
That's the joke, isn't it?
Yeah.
I was going to say how wonderfully reassuring then it is that there's people like yourself, and there'll be people listening to this at some point that may be on that similar loop that goes nowhere, and it's obviously the self that's fueling all these methods, techniques. But just to hear, oh, it's a puff of smoke. It's not a thing that needs to be gotten rid of because it's not a thing in the first place. It isn't a problem.
Yeah. Yeah. It's so paradoxical, trying to talk about this because it's like, on the one hand, it is a problem. It's sort of the root of our suffering and confusion. On the other hand, there's really nothing there. There's no problem. You can't even find the problem. When you start looking for the problem, there's nothing there. So yeah.
Well, and nature, then, nature, just the silence of nature happening, itself, non-conceptual nature. The silence contains all the words, and because you're right, as soon as you say this, it's that. If you say it's that, it's this. It's very slippery.
It is. It's like, like I often like to use that pointer about the map is not the territory, that the word water is not water, which again sounds very trite, but and cliche, but it's actually a profound realization how how frequently and without being aware of it, we mistake the conceptual map that we have for the living reality. And and then at the same time, the map is reality. The map is something reality is doing. The map is like the word, like in Zen, they say the the finger, don't mistake the finger that's pointing for the moon. But then Dogen, this great Zen teacher, came along and pointed out that the finger and the moon are one and the same. That the I don't know exactly how he put it, but I can't remember. But it's like the word. He talked, a lot about language and how language is also like as much the living reality as as anything else. And language is so amazing. I mean, just, we're having this conversation, and like, if you pay attention as you're talking, you begin to see that there's no one there in control of what's coming out. It's just this sort of, you begin to realize how weird it is. Like, there's just these sounds coming out, and somehow these sounds, if you're listening to a foreign language, it does just sound like blah blah blue blah 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 blah. But if you're listening to the language that you understand, it's like it has this incredible ability to materialize this whole thing, like in the imagination, sort of. It's a really profound. It's quite amazing.
Yeah, and you just, maybe think of the sort of, Kabbalah traditions and, where the word itself, and in magical traditions, the word itself or the symbol contains the power because, as you say, it's all it. It's not
Yeah,
not the finger.
yeah, yeah.
I would love to hear about some of your own teachers. I know you had
Uh,
some well-known teachers, some well-known female teachers. I'd love to hear a little bit about what you discovered through them.
yeah. Well, I consider my parents two of my greatest teachers. And then in college, the class on Vedanta and Zen was taught by Richard Clark, who later became a Zen teacher and did several translations of the Sin Sin Ming. So people are often familiar with him through that. Um, and then when I got into the Zen Center, there were many teachers at the San Francisco Zen Center who affected me very deeply. But the one who became my teacher was Mel Weitzman, who was a wonderful man. And then I discovered Joko Beck, Charlotte Joko Beck, and I began doing sessions with her when she came up to Oakland. Um, and we stayed in touch throughout the rest of her life. Um, and then I met Toni Packer, who I consider to be my main teacher. And she had been a teacher at the Rochester Zen Center. She probably would have been Philip Kaplow's Dharma era, except that she started to question the whole tradition, the hierarchy, the all of that. And she discovered Krishnamurti around that time, and what he was saying really meshed with what she was feeling. And so she and some of her students left the Zen Center and founded what became Springwater Center, which is where I lived for 5 years on staff. And Toni was just, I think, one of the most remarkable teachers of our time. She was very simple, down to earth, and just she definitely embodied and conveyed this sense of boundless open presence, spaciousness, listening. And she worked a lot in questions. You know, she wouldn't just spew out answers. She would ask you questions and invite you to explore things. And so she was quite wonderful. And I stayed in touch with her until her death. And and then while I was at Springwater, somebody gave me a copy of I Am That by Nisargadatta, and which I then turned Toni on to, and she really liked him also. And Joko Beck also really liked Nisargadatta. Interesting. But anyway, so Nisargadatta, that book, I mean, that book has been a huge, huge impact on me. I never knew him in person, but he's been, a real guru to me. And 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 then someone who came through Springwater also told me about Jean Klein.
Mm.
And so the next time I was in the Bay Area, Jean was there, and I ended up doing several retreats with Jean Klein towards the end of his life, and another amazing person. And then I was with a number of satsang teachers, Gangaji primarily, but also, Francis Lucille, Isaac Shapiro, um, people who came through the Bay Area. I went to a few things with Adi Ashanti early in his career. Um, and then um, and then I um, attended some sessions with Steve Hagen and had some contact. He's a Zen teacher in Minnesota, who's had a big impact on me. His book first had a big impact on me, and then
Yeah.
and um, and I did a few retreats with a Tibetan teacher, Anam Tubten. He's a really beautiful man, and and then with a Zen teacher named John Tarrant, and uh, so I've really been with, and I'm leaving out all sorts of names that I could think of. Muji, I had a wonderful connection with Muji. Um, um, anyway, so just uh, promiscuous, I guess you would say. I've been all around the map, it seems like. I mean, there's a few things that I never dipped into, but and I'm just always curious, like someone will mention somebody to me that sounds interesting, and I'll
Yeah,
maybe explore them on YouTube or something. And
yeah.
so I'm even now exploring and finding interesting people sometimes. So, and some people seem to settle down with one teacher and one path and just stay there, and that definitely has strengths to it.
Mm.
Um, I think the kind of approach that, and of course, we don't get to decide what approach we're going to take, as we've been talking about. You just find out what your path is as it unfolds. You don't decide. Um, but I think the strength in the way I've done it, and of course, there's potential weaknesses also, but the strength in the way I've done it is just that it's given me lots of different sort of angles on this, or lots of different ways of seeing this, because sometimes you can hear something from one person that you can't hear from somebody else, just because one person has a German accent and the other person, has a Spanish accent or whatever, and or one person reminds you just ever so slightly of your father or your mother, or one person,
Mm.
there's these little things so just hearing the same essential message really in so many different ways I mean, they're not all identical, they are different in ways, but but they're pointing to something very, very much in common, I feel like. The formulations, the ways it's conceptualized can be very different. There's a lot of common ground.
Well, that's such a rich ground, isn't it, to teach from all those influences. I'm like I kind of have a wide range of influences because truth is truth and you come across it and it doesn't really matter who said it. Um, but it's also acts as confirmation, I think, because otherwise you can stay in one tradition or one area and think, okay, but they're saying something that appears different. So are we right and they're wrong, or are they? And then you explore them and you realize, oh no, they're saying the same thing. It's different words. It's the same message.
Yeah, and that's one of the things I remember. I read your book a long time ago, but that I remember really liking about your book was that, it felt like you didn't really land in any sort of fixed place. It felt like there was a lot of sort of seeing things in different ways and different different possibilities.
And I think as well, there's sort of two sides to that. I don't know if you agree, but so one side is the searching or exploring. Really, there's no striving in it anymore. You're just exploring these different messages. And for me personally, I mean, I love reading books and speaking to people like yourself, especially about this because it's quite rare for me anyway here on the island to speak with people who are I can sort of speak frankly to, or we can kind of share the love of this subject. It's great to read Carlos Castaneda, Jesus Christ, the Buddha, the Zen masters, Nisargadatta, and sort of see, okay, I see what they're saying, because even if their wording of what is beyond us is maybe different, they're all saying there's no separate person in here. I mean, that's
Yeah,
just across the board,
that
you
there's
know.
no separation, that this is
Yeah,
one whole. Is there, whether we call it consciousness or
yeah.
interdependent impermanence or whatever. Yeah, I left out Tony Parsons and some of those radical non-dualists from and actually Peter Brown. I attended his Zoom meetings in the
Oh
last
wow.
years of his life occasionally. So um, that's another thread in there. And that was one of the things I felt in your book, I remember, was that you had that radical perspective, but also the practice of meditation perspective. And that to me is one of the sort of things that can happen when you have a varied path like mine and yours, is that you can get into a lot of confusion, like you said, about which one has it right. And I spent a lot of time trying to figure out which was the correct or the highest or the most advanced teaching or something. And a lot of teachers feed into that, like Tony Parsons would say, his is the only true non-duality and so on. And and I just don't see it that way. I mean, I feel like um, there are lots of different. He's wonderful at a certain time. To get that message at a certain time is very liberating. It was for me, and really great. And then I see people sort of stuck in it in a way where they've picked it up almost as an idea, and
Yeah.
you know
Mm.
they can't even use the first person pronoun anymore, and
No.
they're just sort of, oh, meditation, that's just a bad thing, that just confirms the self or something, and that kind of thing, where I feel like I think it's very helpful not to land anywhere and to really, that there is no right way.
And for me, and maybe for you, I wonder, it's beginner's mind. I mean, to call it anything, it's just being present here now with a sort of profound unknowing about what any of this really is. And then you just go to the shops to buy some milk because that's the next thing you do.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, yeah. We really don't know what this is. Um, and it's quite amazing, whatever it is, whatever we are.
Yes.
And, there are certainly ways of seeing it that bring us a lot of joy and freedom and possibility, and other ways of seeing it that create a lot of suffering and confusion. And I think spiritual path is really about waking up from the ways that cause suffering and confusion, seeing kind of how that suffering and confusion happens,
Mm.
and discovering, waking up to the ways of seeing and being that tend to bring joy and
Mm.
all of that. And of course, that doesn't mean that you're always feeling joyful. Uh,
Mm.
but it's seeing even the difficult feelings in a different way.
I wonder because as you say, you have these different influences and perspectives. Do you see perhaps where people get stuck? So for instance, in Zen, do sometimes people get stuck in something in Zen which can be remedied by, radical Advaita maybe, or do people get
Yeah,
stuck in radical Advaita and you can say, well, go on a 10-day silent retreat, you know?
yeah, exactly. Yeah, I think John Tarrant once gave a beautiful way of looking at that. He was sort of comparing it to, if you have cancer, then you get chemotherapy to take care of the cancer, but then the chemotherapy creates other problems, and then you have to take other drugs to get rid of the chemotherapy problems. And then those drugs cause problems, and then you have to do something else to get rid of that. And it's sort of like, I thought that was a sort of a great metaphor for how just what you just said, and it feels very true to me. Like I feel like in one moment I'm in a very Zen kind of way of being, and another moment I'm in a very sort of Advaita Nisargadatta, Ramana Maharshi Guji way of being. And another moment I'm in I kind of cycle through these different things just from week to week or month to month or whatever. Um, and the pattern that I used to have of trying to figure out which one was right has fallen away. It's just sort of, it seems that I need a different one, or a different one lights up for me or whatever at a different moment. And yeah, you see that where I think, every one of those paths has a strength. It has something very profound to offer, and it has potential pitfalls or weaknesses or places where people can misunderstand or get stuck or something. And so then sometimes another path or another teacher, a different, is just what you need to unstick you and sort of shift you and like, oh, uh, and yeah, so yeah, I think that's definitely been my experience. Yeah.
I agree, and that's why it's great to see these different teachers who might, snap you out of some particular mode. When I was younger, I've always been a fairly kind of intellectual person, if you like, very thought based. And so Nisargadatta, that the kind of jhani approach made a lot of sense to me because it was on the intellectual level. But it's funny how you follow one path and then you sort of accidentally become a bhakti. You accidentally become a devotee, and you're like, hang on a second. That's kind of what happened with me. I suddenly just became in love with everything.
Yeah.
Where did that come from? You stay with one path and it can automatically kind of flip you into a path that you didn't know you could kind of access, maybe.
It's true. You know, I mean, this morning I was just in a very bhakti place. You could say I was taking a walk in the park here, and it was raining just very lightly, but the sun was out too. And, raindrops were sort of sparkling, and everything was lit up and sparkling and dazzling. And it was just, I just felt like everything is God and God is everywhere. And, it was just, my heart was just filled with that kind of devotional spirit. And then in another moment, I can be in a very different space, of, yeah,
And if you were to stay in that bhakti space, as we might know from some of the stories, you can really go too much. You can start dancing into the traffic, and you can really tear your clothes off, and the people can go too far with that, especially in India.
yeah, I haven't really gone too far like that. But,
Me
but,
neither.
but yeah, um, anything can be overdone. I think you can overdo anything.
Our time's coming to an end now. It's been really wonderful just talking with you, and sort of sharing this space with you. One final question, just before we go, is what do people need to know?
I think maybe it's not about knowing anything. It's just about um, just kind of noticing, being, there's that old Zen thing where the Zen master is asked what is Zen about, and he says attention, 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 attention. Just um, just giving open, wholehearted attention or loving attention to the reality, the living reality itself, Doesn't mean not thinking at all because that's impossible anyway. It doesn't mean that, but just taking time to kind of drop out of the thinking mind and just drop into the sensory, energetic experiencing of right here, right now, and just paying attention to the simplest things like, just looking at a glass of water or a Kleenex or a tree, listening to the sounds of traffic or the sounds of birds or the hum of the refrigerator, whatever it is, just feeling the breathing and the sensations throughout the body, seeing the thoughts that sort of flit through, that come and go, and how they're just these little sort of bursts of energy. And the more the attention is kind of there in the sensory, energetic, felt realm, um, the more it becomes obvious the wholeness of it all, the no self aspect of it, the ungraspable nature of it, the aliveness of it, the unpin downable quality of it, all those things that if you just read about them and think about them, they're kind of nice ideas. Um, but when you really just open into giving open, loving attention to experiencing as it is, that you start to feel, discover, explore, see these things, grok them really deeply, and and just to take time. We live in such an information-driven, busy world, just to take time to just do nothing. Just do nothing. Just be silent. Just be quiet. Just do nothing. You don't have to be in formal meditation. It could be just pausing between clients or on your break or your lunch break or so whatever, just could be just 5 minutes or 5 seconds. Everybody has a few minutes that they could do this, or not do anything. And just do nothing, just be here. Like if you're in a waiting room, just forget about looking at your phone or picking up a magazine and just be there. See what it's like to just be there in the waiting room. Um, that kind of thing. I mean, I just encourage people to really, um, yeah, just be in the aliveness of here and now. And we always are, really, but it's easy to say that and if difficulties come up, if you're depressed or anxious or angry or upset or worried, just to really explore that, like, what is this? Like feeling it, seeing the thoughts, feeling it in the body, just um, instead of getting lost in the story of, oh, what if this happens? What if that happens? Oh, that's terrible. What if, yeah, that's it.